Well, hey there. I've got a story to tell. If you've got a few extra minutes, I'd like to invite you to join me. About 15 years ago, I moved to a small town in Ohio for a new job opportunity. And this small town had a very good spirit to it. There was a lot of opportunity in this town. A lot of economic growth was taking place. A lot of small businesses were getting started. A lot of large corporations were starting to move into the small town. And if you were a young guy that wanted to make an honest living for himself and, make some decent income, potentially move up in your career, this small town had everything that you needed. And there was a large state highway that went straight through the middle of the town. And on that state highway, there was a mall. A giant mall, one of the biggest malls in the state. I used to go there to pick up, any clothes or any new stuff that I needed. And when you walk into a mall and, you've got the sound of the water fountain that the wishing well, people throw the change in. You've got the smell of the food court. You've got all the stores, the brand new stuff, the sound of crowds of people talking everywhere. And it's just a really good vibe, a good energy when you walk into a shopping mall. Anyways, the politicians of the state decided that they were going to push a bill it was an infrastructure bill that would put a bypass around the city. So the state highway would no longer go through the city. And it passed through, and they built the bypass. And within 3 years, that mall was shut down. Most of the big businesses had moved out of town. The small businesses were dying. The entrepreneurial spirit of the town had completely diminished. The energy of the town was sucked dry. The oxygen supply of the city had been cut off. And if you go and visit this town now, you'll see a bunch of rundown buildings. There's still quite a few people living there, but for the most part, they're living in poverty. There's a lot of drugs. A few hole-in-the-wall bars. It's not a very nice place to visit. The crime rate's high. It's a very ugly town. It's very depressing to drive through it. And it really makes you wonder what was going on in those politicians' heads when they decided that it was a good idea to make a bypass around this town. What made them make that decision? That's a good question to ask. I don't have the answer to it, and I don't think you have the answer to it too, but it can boggle your mind when you think about it. Anyways, that was 15 years ago. Shortly after that, I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then I moved to Dallas for a little while and then back to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I have to say, Tulsa, Oklahoma has a very similar feeling to that small town. It's a fairly decent sized city. It's not a huge city, but it's a city. And back in 2012 or so, the economy was on the up and up. The steel industry was still booming. The oil industry is pretty heavy in Tulsa. There were a lot of small businesses. It seemed like every block you drove down, there was, 10 to 15 small businesses, thriving. Cars in the parking lots, the lights were on, the shelves were stocked, everything was going well. And then, of course, 2020 hit. And it was very reminiscent of what happened to the small town. It was like deja vu, but it was totally different. There was no bypass built around Tulsa. Instead, they shut the city down for a couple of weeks, which, most people, when they hear that, it doesn't sound like a very big deal. But by shutting the city down, what they actually did was they shut the small businesses down, but they kept Walmart open. They closed down the small ma-pa tech shop, but they kept Best Buy open. If your uncle owned a convenience store, they shut that one down. But Walmart and the mainline gas stations were all still open. So they were bypassing the average person and forcing you to go to, these big billion-dollar corporations. So essentially they were doing the same thing, but they just had a different pathway of getting it done. But they were still bypassing the small businesses, strangling the oxygen out of, every entrepreneur across the city. And there was always a rough part of town. Every city has a rough part of town where the buildings are, they're old, everything's a mess, rundown buildings. But then you have a mid-tier part of town where there's a lot of entrepreneurs, there's a lot of small businesses, there's a lot of opportunity. And then you have an upper class part of town, which is mostly a suburb. But then you have big businesses like, movie theaters, Best Buys, restaurants and things like that. But when 2020 hit, it knocked out that mid-tier part of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So all of those small businesses, for the most part, are gone. And if you run a small business, it's interesting because you might make a lot of money, but you also have a lot of debt. And just going a couple of weeks without making money, you're no longer able to pay your debts, for the majority of these business owners. So some of them might try to take out a loan and try to stay afloat, a high interest loan at that. So their chances, of surviving are slim to none. That's kind of what we're looking at now. And, it's bizarre that it worked out that way, and your guess is as good as mine why, they've chose to make the decisions that they've made, but this is where we're at right now. Anyways, in this video, I want to talk about loneliness, because just like that small town or just like Tulsa, Oklahoma, the oxygen supply is the people. When you build a bypass around a town, the people are no longer driving through it. So the town disappears, it disintegrates into nothing. It's a wasteland. And what we're seeing on an individual level with you, me, us people out here, with the start of big tech and social media in the late 2000s, early 2010s, people are staying in more. They have their heads buried in their devices. Even when they're in public, they have their heads down looking at their phones. They're at home on their computers, their laptops, their iPads. They're not really socializing anymore. And these devices are fun, they're exciting, but human beings need two things. We need mental stimulation, and we also need to be heard. We need people to listen to us. And the problem with people burying their faces in these devices is they're stimulating their brain, they're taking all this information in, and for the most part, they're getting radicalized. And I don't care where you come from, who you are, what you look like, what gender you are, what religion you are, whatever. There is a different rabbit hole for everybody, and anybody can be radicalized in whatever, pick your poison. It could be a racial issue, a religious issue, could be, some sort of economic issue, a conspiracy theory, whatever it may be, but you can be radicalized very easily, and it sucks, but I've seen a lot of people of all different walks of life, burying their heads in these electronic devices, and they radicalize themselves. But then they need to be heard. They need other people to hear what they've learned. They need to express themselves in front of other people. All this information that they've soaked up, they need to get it out there, and they need to share it with people. But nobody wants to listen because they sound crazy. They've been radicalized. So people start to view them as conspiracy theorists and weirdos and all that. And that's why we have all of these, you see these mass shooters, these terror attacks, people offing themselves. We see a lot of this stuff. And on top of that, we see the male virginity rate going up. It used to be in the late teens. Now it's in the mid-20s. The marriage rates are going down. The birth rates are going down. Everything that's positive about life, about being social, about having friends, relationships, all of that is going down. And people, I think, feel a little bit demoralized. But I don't want to make this a depressing video. I don't want it to be a sad video. I would rather it be an uplifting video, because if you've listened this far, then you probably relate to this video. You've probably seen similar things that I've seen. You've probably felt the way that I feel. That's why you're still listening. And if you are somebody out there that maybe is seeking a solution of some sort, you got to bring that oxygen supply back. You've got to take your head out of that device. Get off the social media, get off the computer, get off your phone. Walk outside. Socialize, get some friends. Meet some people. And if you don't have any friends right now, which statistically speaking, you're in the norm if you don't have a lot of friends right now. It kind of sucks. It's a sad reality, but it's true. That's just the world that we're living in right now. But even without friends, you can still get out in nature. Go take a hike. Go to a river. Go take a walk somewhere. Be around animals. Plants and animals. Birds, butterflies. Be around living things. Find your peace. There's nothing lonely about being alone in nature. You've got all these animals. You've got all this scenery, and it just feels alive. It's uplifting. It's peaceful. But then ultimately, you're going to want to find some people to share that with. You've got to get out and take some shots. You've got to meet some people. You've got to build some relationships and friendships. Figure out what it is you need to do to build a family. Whatever family means to you. Maybe family is a close circle of friends. Maybe family is meeting a significant other and having children. Could have multiple meanings. But that's the solution. You can't keep your head in the device, stimulating your brain, but never being heard, never seeing reality or being outside. Anyways, guys, that's about all I have for today, and I hope this video wasn't depressing or upsetting. Hopefully it helps you find peace. Speaking of peace and friendships, I've got to hop in the shower and change my clothes, and I think I'm going to go out and grab a drink with a few amigos. Maybe one of these days you and I can meet up and have a drink and we'll be amigos. Hope you got some value out of this video. That's about it for today, guys. Until next time, see ya.